Good morning, boys and girls. Today we are going back and visiting story problems. Today we will look at a unique category of story problems that are sometimes called larger, smaller difference, and sometimes they are later, earlier difference stories. Hopefully, by recognizing that word difference in both of these story type patterns, you'll probably start to get an idea that they both follow a subtraction pattern. Looking at the bottom of page 58, we see larger minus smaller equals difference. When we see these problems, we compare two numbers and we find out how much greater or less one number is from another by subtracting. Just remember, larger minus smaller equals the difference. To solve the problems, we use the same 4 steps we learned earlier. The abbreviation letters that are sometimes used to indicate this type of a problem is LSD. Let's begin by looking at example 1. There were 324 girls and 289 boys in the school. How many fewer boys than girls are there in the school? Well, if you remember previously, we used to solve this sort of problem by setting up a little diagram kind of like this. The larger number minus the smaller number equals the difference. We have a larger number and we have a smaller number. The smaller number and its difference, the difference here, all have to even out. I don't know that that made a lot of sense, but let's continue on. I think this will come back to you. The first step in solving any story problem is to recognize the plot, the pattern. And this is a larger, smaller difference pattern. That means it has a subtraction equation. Then, step 2 is to write the equation with all of the information we know before we would go on and solve. In this case, we know there are 324 girls. That's our larger number. Our smaller number is 289 boys. And what we're looking for is the difference. I'll do that, mark it with a capital D because we don't know the answer. And now we'll begin to solve. I'm just going to write on over that D. No, actually, I'll write out the problem again. Here is my equation. I've shown my work. Now I'm going to write it out again in order to solve. And I'm going to have to do a lot of borrowing and carrying. I can see right away that even when I borrow here from the tens column, I'm going to have to turn around and borrow again in order to complete my tens subtraction. So I'm just going to start right away by borrowing from the hundreds. Instead of 3 100s, I now only have 2. I throw 10 tens over. Now instead of 2 tens, I have 12 tens. I'm going to borrow right away. I only have 11 tens now. And I have not 4 ones, but 14 ones. 14 minus 9 is 5. 11 minus 8 is 3. 2 minus 2 is 0. I don't want to write that down because I don't want to mucky up a nice number. There's no reason to put it. I've found my difference, and so I would say that the difference equals 35. And the question said, how many fewer boys than girls were there? There are 35 fewer boys. I write it all out and I circle. Let's check with what the book said, and they have done the same thing. Again, notice they recognized the pattern, they wrote the problem, they solved, and then they wrote the answer using labels. Now a similar but slightly different problem involves earlier, later difference. We often see this type of a problem in time. In this case, later minus earlier equals the difference, and the abbreviation we sometimes associate with it is LED. Later minus earlier equals difference. So in example 2, how many years were there from 1492 to 1620? Well, the later time is 1620. The earlier time is 1492, and that will equal our difference. There is our equation. Step 2 is done. Now let's solve. 1620 minus 1492. I see I'm going to have to borrow to do this, and I as well will have to borrow to do the subtract the tens column. I'm hopping right over to my hundreds column to begin borrowing. Instead of 6 100s, I now have 5. I throw my 10 over here. Instead of 2 10s, I have 12 10s. I need to borrow right away, so instead of 12 10s, I'm left with only 11, and I throw 10 1s over to the ones column. 10 minus 2 is 8. 11 minus 9 is 2. 5 minus 4 is 1. And I have my answer. The difference between these 2 years, the difference equals 128 years. And I circle it. And let's check with your book. Sure enough, that is what they came up with as well, 128 years. In example 3, we're told that Abraham Lincoln was born in 1809 and died in 1865. How many years did he live? Well, hopefully you've recognized this as a later, earlier, difference story. Our later time is 1865. Our earlier time is 1809, and we need to subtract to find the difference. Here is step 1. We've identified the problem. Step 2, we've written the equation. Step 3 will be to solve the equation. 5, 1, 15 minus 9 is 6, 5 minus 0 is 5. I have my difference now. That was step 3, I solved, and now I write the answer. D equals 56 years. That means that our dear Mr. Abraham Lincoln only lived to be 56 years old. Now it is your turn. You are going to do 2 problems, A and B. Remember, I want you to read the story, identify what's happening, and write the pattern. Write your equation using the information you know and putting a letter in for the information you don't know. Solve the problem, and then write your answer, including the letter equals your answer with the label.